Picture this. A world where golden light bleeds from the branches of a tree so vast it scrapes the heavens themselves, where ancient kingdoms have crumbled into dust and their rulers, half divine and half mad, clutch fragments of a broken god like weapons, where the very laws of death have been shattered, where armies of the undead roam fields soaked in the blood of wars that never truly ended, and where somewhere in the middle of all that ruin and silence and despair, a forgotten exile wakes up on a beach with nothing but a whisper of grace and a direction to walk. Tonight, we are going deep, deeper than most players ever go, beyond the fog gates and the boss arenas, beyond the item descriptions that most people skip, beyond the surface of one of the most intricate and breathtaking worlds ever created in a video game. Tonight we are exploring the facts, the secrets, the hidden truths, and the buried tragedies of Elden Ring. Before we begin, I want you to get comfortable. Pull your blanket a little closer. Settle your head into your pillow. Let the sounds of the outside world soften and fade until all that remains is this. Whether you're here because you love every hidden corner of the lands between, or whether you simply need something rich and gentle to carry you into sleep, you're exactly where you need to be. This is going to be a long, slow, immersive journey, and there is nowhere you need to be, and nothing you need to do except rest and listen. Let these facts wash over you like waves. Let your mind wander through golden fields and crumbling ruins and ancient archives full of forgotten knowledge. And if sleep finds you before we reach the end, that is perfectly all right. The lands between will still be here when you wake, so close your eyes if you like, and let me tell you things about Elden Ring that most people never knew. To understand the secrets of Elden Ring, you first have to understand that the world you explore in the game is not the world as it was meant to be. The lands between, for all its golden beauty and haunting grandeur, is a place defined by catastrophe. It is a world after the fall, and to appreciate just how far it has fallen, you need to know what it looked like before. Long before the Erdtree glowed on the horizon, before Queen Marika ascended to godhood, before the Elden Ring was even brought to this world, the lands between was governed by a completely different order. The primeval order of the Crucible. The Crucible is one of the most fascinating and underexplored concepts in all of Elden Ring's lore, and most players walk past its secrets without ever truly understanding what they represent. The Crucible was the primordial state of life itself. In the age of the Crucible, all living things were connected in a vast, chaotic, wondrous web of shared existence. Animals and plants and humans and creatures that defied all categorization blended and overlapped in ways that seem grotesque by modern standards, but were, in that ancient time, considered sacred. This is why certain enemies in the game sprout tails from their backs, or grow wings from their shoulders, or have horns erupting from their heads in ways that seem monstrous. These are not deformities, they are remnants of the Crucible, living echoes of a time when the boundaries between species were fluid and beautiful, rather than fixed and rigid. The Crucible Knights, those terrifying armoured warriors who seem almost impossible to stagger, bear Crucible aspects themselves. Look closely at their armour, and you will notice it is not entirely metal. It is partially organic. Scales and carapace integrated into steel. They were among the earliest warriors of the Erdtree, soldiers from the transition period between the old Crucible Order and the new Golden One, and they carry that ancient heritage in their very bodies. This is also why their incantations summon tails and wings and aspects of ancient beasts. They're not using spells so much as remembering what it felt like to be something older and stranger than human. The fact that Elden Ring treats the Crucible with such reverence is significant. Most fantasy worlds present ancient chaos as something to be overcome, something monstrous that civilization heroically replaced. Elden Ring does not take that position. The item descriptions and NPC dialogue that reference the Crucible speak of it with something close to nostalgia, as though the Golden Order that replaced it, for all its beauty, lost something irreplaceable in the transition, something wild and alive and fundamentally true about the nature of existence. This tension between the old chaotic order and the new golden one is woven into almost every corner of the game's lore, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now, what existed in the age of the Crucible that was powerful enough to eventually give way to the Erdtree? The answer is the formless mother, the fell god of the flame of ruin, the god of scarlet rot, the frenzied flame, and most importantly a being called the Greater Will. These are the outer gods, entities of incomprehensible power that exist outside the world entirely, exerting their influence through agents and artifacts and the faith of believers. Understanding the outer gods is essential to understanding everything that happens in Elden Ring, because almost every faction, every war, every tragedy in the game can be traced back to the competition between these cosmic entities for dominance over the lands between. The Greater Will is the outer god that ultimately won, at least for a time. It is the entity behind the Erdtree, behind the Golden Order, behind the power of the Elden Ring itself. But here is a fact that most players miss entirely. The Greater Will is never depicted as benevolent. It is not a loving god. It is not even particularly interested in the well-being of the people who worship it. The Greater Will is an entity with an agenda that operates on a cosmic scale, and the people of the lands between, including Queen Marika herself, are simply its instruments, its tools. The Greater Will sent an elden beast to the lands between to carry the Elden Ring, and that elden beast, that golden leviathan you fight at the very end of the game, is not a guardian in any protective sense. It is an enforcer, a cosmic bureaucrat ensuring that the Greater Will's chosen order remains intact regardless of the cost to the people living under it. This reframes the entire game in a fascinating way. The Golden Order that the Tarnished is asked to restore is not inherently good. It is simply the order that the Greater Will prefers, and the question the game quietly asks in the gaps between item descriptions and in the expressions on the faces of its dying characters is whether restoring that order is truly the right thing to do, or whether the shattering, as catastrophic as it was, might have been the first step towards something genuinely new. Far to the east, beyond any border the player can cross, lies a place called the Lands of Reeds. This is where the Tarnished warrior Yura comes from, and it is where the samurai class originates for player characters. The Lands of Reeds are never shown in the game. They exist only in item descriptions and in the vague eastward gestures of NPCs. But their existence implies something remarkable about the scope of the world that From Software built. The Lands Between is not the entire world. It is one region of a much larger reality, and the cultures that exist beyond its edges are real and distinct, and have their own histories and their own relationships with the Golden Order. Yura hunts Bloody Fingers, those who serve the Formless Mother, as a personal mission. His dedication suggests a history of loss connected to that outer god. What happened to him in the Lands of Reeds? What did the Formless Mother take from him? The game never tells you. It simply leaves that silence there, heavy and suggestive, trusting you to feel the weight of what is not said. The Elden Ring itself, the central object around which the entire story revolves, is not a ring in the conventional sense. It is not jewellery. It is a concept made manifest. The Elden Ring is the fundamental law of the cosmos as the greater will has chosen to write it. It governs life, death, order, the flow of grace, the nature of existence itself within the lands between. When it was whole, the world operated according to these laws automatically. Death led to the Erdtree. Grace guided the faithful. The natural order of things persisted without anyone needing to enforce it, because the ring itself enforced it simply by existing. When Marika shattered it, she did not just break a powerful artifact, she broke reality. The laws that governed the lands between stopped working. Death became inconsistent. Grace became erratic. The Erdtree stopped accepting the dead. The natural cycles that everyone had taken for granted simply ceased functioning, and the world began to unravel at its edges. Here is something extraordinary that most players never consider. The Elden Ring was shattered before the Shattering War began. Marika broke it first, and the war between her children was a consequence of that act, not a cause of it. The demigods fought over the shards because the shards were now the source of power that the whole ring had previously distributed evenly. Marika's act of destruction created the scarcity that fueled the war. She is not a passive victim of the shattering, she is its architect. Why did she do it? That is a question we will return to. But for now, simply sit with the knowledge that the god who was supposed to uphold the order chose to destroy it, and that everything, every boss fight, every ruined kingdom, every desperate NPC you meet in the lands between is downstream of that single act of divine rebellion. Queen Marika the Eternal is perhaps the most complex and tragic character in all of Elden Ring, and she is also one of the least understood, largely because the game reveals her story in fragments scattered across the entire world. She does not narrate her own tale. She does not appear and explain herself. Instead, you piece her together from the prayers of her followers, the accusations of her enemies, the grief of her children, and the terrible tableau of her punishment that you find at the very heart of the Erdtree. Let us start at the beginning. Marika was not born a god. She was born a human, specifically a Numen, one of a people who originally came from outside the lands between entirely. The Numen are described as being of a lineage close to the Greater Will, which implies they were chosen or perhaps created specifically to serve as vessels for divine power. Marika was selected by the Greater Will to become its god in the lands between, and through a process that the game only hints at, she ascended to a state of divinity, becoming immortal, becoming the vessel of the Elden Ring, becoming the centre around which the Golden Order organised itself. But here is the first extraordinary fact about Marika. She did not achieve this peacefully. In the early days of the Golden Order, before the Erdtree fully established its dominance, there were rival powers, ancient Crucible gods, outer god influences, and specifically a formidable force called the Fell God, the god of the Flame of Ruin, who was worshipped by the giants who once dominated the lands between. The giants were extraordinary beings, massive, ancient, deeply connected to the old order of the world. They wielded fire that was not merely physical flame, but something connected to the cosmos itself, the flame of ruin that could potentially threaten the Erdtree. Marika, in one of the most consequential acts of her divine reign, led the war against the giants personally. The war against the giants is ancient history by the time Elden Ring's story takes place, but its consequences echo through everything. The mountaintops of the giants, that frozen, desolate region in the game's final third, is the battlefield where that war was decided. The ruins of the giant civilization lie scattered across the snow. Their fire is still burning in the Forge of the Giants, contained but never extinguished. And here is the heartbreaking secret of that war. Marika did not simply defeat the giants, she enslaved one. A single giant named the Fire Giant was left alive, his legs severed, chained to the Forge of the Giants to serve as its eternal keeper. Immobile, ancient, humiliated, this being has spent an incomprehensible amount of time guarding the very flame his people worshipped, prevented from using it to resist the Golden Order. When you fight the Fire Giant, one of the game's most visually spectacular bosses, you are fighting something that has been a prisoner for longer than most civilizations have existed. His rage and grief are not the rage of a monster. They are the rage of an ancient being who has endured suffering beyond imagination, and finally has an opponent worth fighting. The fact that Marika chose to preserve rather than destroy him raises questions about her nature that the game never fully answers. Was it mercy? Was it cruelty? Was it practical, keeping the flame controlled through its keeper rather than risk it escaping entirely? Or was it something more personal, a recognition of shared suffering between two beings who were both, in their own ways, trapped? After establishing the Golden Order and securing the Erdtree's dominance, Marika took a consort. Her first husband was Godfrey, a human warrior of extraordinary power who became the first Elden Lord. Godfrey is fascinating because he represents the ideal of the early Golden Order perfectly. He was a warrior king, fierce and loyal, who led the battles that expanded the Erdtree's dominion across the lands between. His grace, that golden light that signifies the favour of the Golden Order, was immense. He glowed with it. His generals glowed with it. His armies moved under golden skies, and their victories seemed like proof that the Greater Will's order was righteous and just. Marika and Godfrey had children together, 3 children who would become known as the God Queen's firstborn, Godwyn the Golden, and the twins Malenia and Michaela. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before those children came into the world, before the Golden Order reached its heights, something happened that shaped Marika's soul in ways that never healed. Her son, Godwyn the Golden, was the first to die, and his death was unlike any death that had ever occurred before. Godwyn was killed not in battle, not by any weapon, but through a ritual conducted simultaneously with an assassination attempt on Ranni, one of Marika's children by her second consort Radahn, the Knight of the Black Knives. This event is so significant that it deserves its own section. But for now, know that Godwyn's death broke something in Marika. Not just her heart, something deeper. Something that began the slow unravelling of her faith in the order she'd built and the god she'd agreed to serve. Here is a fact that stops most players cold when they first encounter it. Marika and her second consort Radahn are the same person. This is not a metaphor or a spiritual connection. Radahn is Marika. They are 2 aspects of a single being, 2 personalities, 2 identities sharing one divine body. When Marika becomes Radahn, her hair changes from white to red, her body becomes male, and her personality shifts from the serene, distant goddess to the passionate, driven champion. When Radahn becomes Marika, the reverse occurs. How is this possible? The game suggests that the process of becoming the vessel of the Elden Ring and the Greater Will's god in the lands between changed Marika on a fundamental level, creating a second self. Radahn was not always Marika. The historical record suggests they were once separate people, but at some point, Perhaps through the power of the Elden Ring itself, perhaps through some act of divine transformation, the two merged, became one, and then, in a domestic arrangement that must have been extraordinarily strange for everyone involved, Marika effectively divorced herself, and then married herself again under a new identity. Their children as a couple include Malenia the Severed and Miquella the Unalloyed, twins born under a curse that is directly connected to the power of the outer gods. Malenia was cursed with scarlet rot, the influence of the god of rot from the moment of her birth. Miquella was cursed with an eternal youth he could not escape, remaining in the body of a child despite the power of his divine lineage. These curses were not accidents. They were the mark of outer gods pressing against the Golden Order, claiming their influence over even the children of the god vessel herself. What did Marika think, raising children who bore the marks of her enemies? The game does not say, but it implies in the sorrow of Miquella's abandoned Erdtree and in the tragedy of Malenia's lifelong suffering that she loved them and could not protect them, and that this failure was another stone added to the weight that eventually broke her. Radahn, for his part, spent much of his divine life trying to repair the Elden Ring. This is one of the most poignant reversals in the entire story. Marika shattered the ring in an act of rebellion, and Radahn, the other half of her being, dedicated himself to putting it back together. They were literally working against each other. This same body, two opposing wills, one trying to destroy the cosmic order and one desperately trying to preserve it. The red gold nails that you find embedded in Radagon's body when you fight him at the end of the game are his own handiwork. He literally nailed himself to the Elden Ring, trying to fuse himself with it, trying to repair it through sheer force of divine will. It did not work, but the attempt tells you everything about who Radahn was: devoted, desperate, and ultimately insufficient to the task. Of all the events in Elden Ring's history, none reverberates more profoundly than the Night of the Black Knives. This single night of assassination, conducted in secret by a group of killers wielding blades imbued with a fragment of the Rune of Death, set in motion every catastrophe that followed. The shattering, the wars of the demigods, the death of the Golden Order, the rise of the Tarnished. All of it traces back to this one night. Let us set the scene. Godwyn the Golden was the firstborn son of Queen Marika and Godfrey. He was, by all accounts, the best of them. Not the most powerful, not the most brilliant, but the most genuinely good. In a world full of divine ambition and cosmic maneuvering, Godwyn was a warrior who made friends with his enemies after defeating them. He showed mercy when mercy was costly. He extended grace to those who had fought against the Golden Order and welcomed them into it. He was beloved in a way that is rare for those born to power, genuinely and not merely politically. The assassins who killed him used blades coated in destined death, the principle of true and permanent mortality that Marika had sealed away from the world. In the Golden Order, death was not final for those favoured by the Erdtree. Their souls returned to the roots of the great tree, were processed and recycled into new life. True death, the permanent extinguishing of a soul, had been removed from the world by Marika as a deliberate act of cosmic policy. She had stripped it from the Elden Ring and locked it away. Why? The game suggests it was to empower the Golden Order's promise of quasi-immortality. Without the threat of true death, the faithful had less to fear. The Erdtree's promise was more credible. The Order was more stable. But removing destined death from the world also meant that fragments of it could be weaponized by those who could access them. And on the Night of the Black Knives, that is exactly what happened. Godwyn was killed not just in body but in soul. His body survived, his physical form persisting without consciousness, without identity, without the spark of self that makes a person real. His soul was destroyed completely, snuffed out by destined death, while his body continued in a horrible parody of life. This is why the Prince of Death, as he is called in the late game, is so disturbing. He is a massive, writhing, half-human growth beneath the Erdtree's roots. His body, denied the mercy of death, kept growing, kept changing, merged with the roots, became something that is not alive and is not dead, that is not a person and is not entirely a creature. Godwyn the Golden, the best of Marika's children, became the most grotesque thing in the world. Simultaneously with Godwyn's murder, an attempt was made on the life of Ranni the Witch. Ranni, daughter of Radahn and Rennala, had a connection to Godwyn through the mechanics of the assassination ritual. The Black Knife assassins used a fragment of the Rune of Death to kill Godwyn's soul while keeping his body, and they did the reverse to Ranni. They destroyed Ranni's body while preserving her soul. Ranni effectively performed a deliberate act of self-destruction to abandon her physical form and her connection to the Golden Order, using the chaos of Godwyn's murder as cover. Here is the fact that most players find most astonishing when they first piece it together. Ranni orchestrated her own assassination. The Night of the Black Knives was her plan. She used the Black Knife assassins, women of the Numen lineage bound to Marika's service, and she subverted them, directed them, used them to accomplish two goals at once: the death of Godwyn, which destabilized the Golden Order, and her own liberation from her physical form and the destiny the Greater Will had planned for her. Why did Ranni want to escape her fate? Because the Greater Will had chosen her as the next god of the lands between. She was destined to become the next Marika, the next vessel of the Elden Ring, the next instrument of an outer god's will. And Ranni, brilliant and proud and deeply unwilling to be anyone's instrument, refused. She chose annihilation over submission. She destroyed her own body rather than let the Greater Will use it. Her soul survived in a small doll, a constructed body that she inhabits throughout her questline. She spent the centuries after the Night of the Black Knives working toward her own goal, her own order that would replace the Greater Will's influence entirely. The Age of the Stars that she seeks is an order defined not by a cosmic tyrant's preferences, but by cold, distant, indifferent stellar forces. No oversight, no cosmic agenda, simply the universe operating on its own terms without a god pressing its thumb onto the scales. Whether Ranni's Age of Stars is better than the Golden Order is genuinely ambiguous. The game presents it as mysterious and beautiful, but also cold. Ranni herself acknowledges that her chosen order is vast and dark and full of things unknown. She is not promising a paradise. She is promising freedom from divine oversight, which may or may not be the same thing. The aftermath of the Night of the Black Knives broke Marika. Her firstborn, her golden son, was murdered and corrupted into something unrecognizable. The assassins who did it were members of her own service, and somewhere in the depths of her divine knowledge, she may have suspected or even known that Ranni had orchestrated it, which meant that one of her other children had deliberately shattered the sanctity of her court. It was after the Night of the Black Knives that Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The timing is not coincidental. The message she was sending was not subtle, even if most people in the lands between never understood it. By destroying the ring, she was saying something to the Greater Will. You asked me to maintain this order. You made me into this god. You took my son from me. And so I am ending our arrangement. It was an act of grief and rebellion and possibly madness all at once, and it changed everything. When the Elden Ring shattered, its fragments, called the Great Runes, scattered across the lands between and were drawn to the most powerful beings present, the Demigods, the children and grandchildren of Marika and Godfrey. And the possession of a great rune did not make these already extraordinary beings more stable or more rational. It made them more of whatever they already were, amplifying their strengths and their flaws until both became indistinguishable. The war that followed is called the Shattering, and it is the defining catastrophe of recent history in the lands between. Demigod fought demigod in conflict so massive and so destructive that entire regions of the world still bear the scars. Armies were wiped out, cities were reduced to rubble, and when it was done, no one had won. No one had gathered enough runes to approach the Elden Ring and claim its power. Everyone had simply suffered, and the world had been left broken and leaderless. Let us meet the demigods, because each of them is a tragedy unto themselves. Godric the Grafted, the first major demigod most players encounter, is a deeply pathetic figure when you understand his history. He's the weakest of the demigods, the most distant from Marika's bloodline, a descendant so removed from divine power that he is mocked by the others. His great rune gave him minimal power compared to the runes held by his more potent cousins. So Godric did what desperate people do when they lack power. He tried to steal it. Grafting, the practice that gives him his surname, is exactly as horrifying as it sounds. Godric grafts the limbs of other creatures and people onto his own body, incorporating their strength into himself. The throne room of Stormvale Castle, his seat of power, is surrounded by the writhing, screaming victims of his grafting, bodies assembled from multiple people's parts, incorporated into the castle walls themselves. Godric represents vanity and insecurity taken to their most extreme logical conclusion. He is what happens when someone who is genuinely lesser than those around him refuses to accept that fact and instead pursues power through violation of others. And yet, there is a moment in his fight when he grafts a dragon's head onto his severed arm and roars with something that might be triumph, that reveals the tragedy beneath the grotesquerie. He is not evil in the way that a creature of darkness is evil. He is a small man in a world of giants, doing terrible things because he cannot bear to be small. Ranni, Queen of the Full Moon, is in some ways the most heartbreaking figure in the early game. She was not born a demigod. She was the leader of the Academy of Raya Lucaria, the greatest centre of sorcery in the lands between, a scholar and a queen who commanded respect through brilliance rather than bloodline. Radahn came to her as a conqueror, his red-haired armies threatening her academy, and instead of a war, they had a love story. Ranni fell completely and utterly in love with Radahn, and he with her, and for a time they seemed to have been genuinely happy. Then Radahn left, called back to Marika, recalled to his divine duty and his other self, and Ranni was abandoned with 3 children, Radahn, Rikard and Ranni, and a piece of amber that Radahn had given her as a gift, and that happened to contain a shard of the Elden Ring. The madness you find her in when you reach the grand library of Raya Lucaria is the madness of grief. She sits among the ruins of her library, surrounded by the students who have sworn themselves to her care, cradling the amber, singing a lullaby to nothing. She is not raging. She is not scheming. She is simply broken, endlessly trying to recreate something she has lost by using the amber's power to rebirth creatures into new forms. Her great rune, the great rune of the unborn, allows her to give anyone a new beginning, to respect their character in game terms, to offer the possibility of starting again. For Rhaenyra, this is not a gift she offers lightly. It is the only mercy she knows how to give, because it is the mercy she herself most desperately needs and can never receive. She cannot reborn herself into a woman who was never abandoned. Starscourge Radahn is one of the most beloved characters in all of Elden Ring, and the facts surrounding him are extraordinary. He was perhaps the most powerful of all the demigods in raw combat capability, a warrior of such immense strength and skill that he held the stars themselves in place. This is not metaphor. Radahn learned gravitational magic specifically to keep the stars from moving, because Ranni's destiny was tied to the movement of a particular star, and Radahn refused to allow fate to proceed as planned. He loved his mother Rhaenyra, grieved her abandonment, and resented Ranni for the choices she had made. Holding the stars in place was his way of resisting the future. The tragedy of Radahn is that he was infected by scarlet rot during the Shattering, transmitted through battle with Malenia, and the rot consumed his mind while leaving his body intact. By the time you encounter him, he is an animal. His armour still sits on his massive frame. His great twin swords still swing with devastating precision. But the person who commanded legions, who loved his horse Leonard so much that he cast gravity magic to make himself lighter so Leonard could always carry him, that person is gone. What remains is a beast wearing the armour of a legend, and all his soldiers who still camp on Caelid's red sands refuse to kill him out of love and loyalty, instead waiting for a worthy warrior to give him an honourable end. The detail about his horse Leonard is one of the most quietly devastating facts in the game. Radahn grew so massive, so cosmically powerful, that no ordinary horse could carry his weight. Rather than simply getting a larger horse, rather than accepting that he had outgrown such a companion, Radahn learned an entirely new school of magic solely so that Leonard could remain his horse. This is not the behaviour of a warlord. It is the behaviour of someone who loves something small and specific and refuses to let power take it away. Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, made a choice that is arguably the most philosophically interesting of all the demigods. He deliberately fed himself to a god-devouring serpent, merging with it, becoming something that was simultaneously Rykard and not Rykard, human and serpent, divine and monstrous. He did this, according to his own philosophy, because the Erdtree and the Golden Order were a lie, and the only way to resist an immortal institution was to become something equally immortal through different means. He invited his followers, the Volcano Manor assassins, to join him in eating the flesh of gods. He sought to build a blasphemous counterculture, a dark mirror of the Golden Order that consumed divinity rather than worshipping it. There is something almost admirable about Rykard's rebellion, if you can see past the horror of what he became. He identified a real problem. The Golden Order is not just. The Erdtree's promise is not equally distributed. The system rewards those who are already favoured and ignores or destroys those who are not. Rykard's response to this injustice is monstrous, but his diagnosis is not wrong. Morgott the Omen King is the secret identity of Margott the Fell Omen, the first major boss most players encounter. And the tragedy of his existence is one of the most quietly devastating in the game. Morgott was born an omen, a child marked from birth with horns and talons, signs of ancient divine curse or blessing depending on your perspective. Omens are shunned by the Golden Order, considered abominations, thrown into the sewers beneath Lendel, the capital city, literally cast away by the society that their own divine lineage helped create. And yet Morgott loves the Golden Order. He is the most devoted champion of the Erdtree among all the demigods. He conceals his horns and he omen nature beneath a disguise, calls himself Morgott, hunts those who would challenge the divine order, and spends his existence defending a society that despises him. When you finally face him as Morgott in Leyndell, after already having defeated his disguised form, his words carry a weight that is hard to shake. He calls the Tarnished fools for seeking the Elden Ring. He speaks of the cursed nature of all who reach for it, and then he fights with everything he has to defend a throne he was never allowed to sit on, in a city that would never accept him as anything but a monster. Morgott is a man who has devoted his entire existence to a cause that hates him, and the game never once asks you to stop and grieve for him. It simply presents him, lets you fight him, and trusts that somewhere in the encounter you will understand. Morg, Lord of Blood, is Morgott's twin brother, and their divergent paths represent one of the most pointed contrasts in the game. Both were omens, both were cast into the sewers. But where Morgott chose loyalty to a system that rejected him, Morg chose a different patron entirely. He received the favour of the formless mother, the outer god of blood, and in her blessing found the acceptance and power that the Golden Order had denied him. He built his own kingdom in the depths, the Mogwyn dynasty, a blood-soaked realm dedicated to his outer god, and he kidnapped Miquella in an attempt to use the demigod's divine power to elevate himself further. The fact that Morg chose the formless mother while Morgott chose the Erdtree, given that both experienced identical rejection, says something uncomfortable about the nature of belonging. Some people, when rejected by the dominant power structure, find another one to serve. Others reject the very idea of belonging to any structure. Morg chose service. He simply chose a different master. We have touched on the outer gods several times already, and now it is time to examine them directly, because they are perhaps the most underappreciated layer of Elden Ring's cosmology, and the one with the most profound implications for everything in the game. Outer gods are entities that exist outside the world entirely. They do not live in the lands between. They do not have bodies that can be found or fought. They exert their influence through representatives, through gifts of power, through the corruption or elevation of those who open themselves to contact. Think of them as vast, incomprehensible forces that press against the edges of reality like fingers pressing against a membrane, not quite inside but always present, always influencing. The greater will, as we have discussed, is the dominant outer god of the current age. Its instrument is the Elden Ring. Its preferred representative was Marika. Its enforcer is the Elden Beast. The Golden Order is its preferred state of the world, and it will do whatever is necessary to restore and preserve that state. But the greater will is not unchallenged. The god of scarlet rot, sometimes called the goddess of rot, is an outer god of decay and transformation. Scarlet rot is not simply a disease in the world of Elden Ring. It is a cosmic force, a kind of counter-order that breaks down and reconstitutes, that dissolves existing structures to make way for something new. The Lake of Rot beneath Nokstella, the Eternal City, is one of the most visually striking areas in the game. A vast underground body of shimmering scarlet liquid, glowing with a terrible beauty. This is not merely a hazardous substance. It is the physical presence of a god. Malenia is the god of Rot's chosen champion, though she never sought the role. She was born with the rot inside her, not as punishment or as curse in any simple sense, but as the mark of an outer god's claim on her being. She has fought her whole life against the rot that lives within her, and she has also, in moments of extremity, fully unleashed it. The Scarlet Bloom, the event that devastated Caelid and created the wasteland you cross in the game's second act, was caused by Malenia releasing the rot in a moment of desperate battle against Radahn. She did not choose to destroy Caelid. The rot simply erupted from her in its full magnitude when pushed beyond her limits, and nothing could contain it. The tragedy of Malenia is that she is extraordinarily beautiful and extraordinarily powerful and completely, in some deep sense, not free. The rot inside her is always there, always pressing. She has learned to use it, to fight with it, but she cannot remove it. She is, in the most literal possible sense, a god's weapon wearing a person's face. And she is fully aware of this, and continues anyway, because what else is there to do? You were born into a situation you did not choose. You did not ask for this power. But it is yours, and so you learn to live with it, and even to embrace it, even knowing it will eventually consume you entirely. The frenzied flame is perhaps the most disturbing outer god of all. Unlike the other outer gods, which seek to impose or maintain some form of order, the frenzied flame seeks the opposite. It wants to end all separation, to dissolve the boundaries between individuals, between life and death, between existence and void, to return everything to a formless, undifferentiated unity. It is not evil in any conventional sense. It does not hate. It simply cannot tolerate individuation. It sees the boundaries between things as the source of all suffering, and in a dark, twisted way, it is not entirely wrong. Separation is the source of loneliness, of grief, of the particular anguish of watching someone you love suffer and being unable to truly share their pain. The frenzied flame's solution to this problem is annihilation, which is not a solution so much as the elimination of the problem by eliminating everything. Hieta, the blind woman who asks you for shabriri grapes throughout her questline and eventually reveals herself as a prophet of the frenzied flame, is one of the most unsettling characters in the game precisely because she is so sincere. She's not deceived. She's not being manipulated against her will. She genuinely believes that the flame of frenzy represents liberation, and she pursues it with open eyes, or rather with deliberately blinded ones, because the frenzied flame's followers blind themselves to see its light more clearly. Her final form, transformed into a finger maiden of the frenzied flame, is horrifying. But she seems, in her way, at peace. The formless mother is the outer god of blood, and her story is uniquely intimate compared to the other outer gods. She reaches into the world not through natural forces or cosmic principles, but through wounds, specifically through the wounds inflicted on her by the process of giving birth. She bleeds, and through her blood she reaches into people who have been similarly wounded, who carry their own wounds openly, and she offers them connection through shared pain. Mog received her gifts. The bloody fingers who invade other players' worlds serve her. The dynasty of Red she seeks to build is not a political project, but a religious one. A family of the wounded gathered around a mother who loves through harm. There is something deeply strange and almost sympathetic about the formless mother when you examine her closely. She is not simply a god of violence. She is a god of vulnerability, of the openness that comes with injury, of the intimacy that can exist between people who have each been broken. That her chosen expression of this intimacy is blood-soaked horror is a statement about what happens when love and pain become completely intertwined. The lands between. In the age of Elden Ring is not the first civilization to have risen and fallen there. Beneath the current world lie the ruins of older ones, and some of those older civilizations were stranger and more wondrous than anything the Golden Order ever produced. The Eternal Cities, Nokron and Nokstella, are the remnants of a civilization called the Night Folk or the Nox, a people who were banished underground by the Greater Will for an act of hubris. The Nox tried to create their own Elden Ring. They sought to reproduce the cosmic artifact that governed all existence, to create a version of it that the Greater Will did not control. For this transgression, they were cast into the earth, sealed away from the sky, denied the light of the Erdtree forever. And yet underground, they thrived. They built cities of extraordinary beauty lit by artificial stars, by constellations of silver and gold that mimicked the sky they had been forbidden. Nokron, City of the Eternal, is one of the most visually breathtaking areas in the game, a vast underground metropolis frozen in a moment of its own grandeur, inhabited now only by ghosts and silvery warrior spirits. But in its prime, it must have been magnificent. A civilization that refused to accept its punishment and instead built something glorious out of defiance. The Nox also developed unique magic. Their silver tears, those mercury-like blob creatures that morph into humanoid forms, are not creatures in any biological sense. They are constructs, living mercury animated by Noxcraft. Their mimic Tear, one of the most popular summons in the game, is a silver tear that has taken on the form of your own character, copying your weapons, your armour, your spells. There is something philosophically interesting about fighting alongside a perfect copy of yourself. The Nox built tools that reflected rather than simply served. The Crucible civilization predates even the Nox, existing in the age before the Golden Order, as we have already discussed. But there are other ancient peoples whose ruins you explore throughout the game. The Albinaurics are a constructed people, created by human sorcerers who sought to produce human life artificially. The first generation of Albinaurics were beautiful, pale beings of considerable intelligence and sensitivity. Latenna, one of the game's Spirit Ash summons, is a first-generation Albinauric, and her loyalty, her grief over the death of her wolf companion Lobo, her quiet determination in service of Miquella's purpose, mark her as one of the most fully realised supporting characters in the game. The second generation of Albinaurics are frogs. This is, in its own way, one of the most quietly devastating facts in the game. The sorcerers who created the Albinaurics failed to perfect their craft in the second generation, producing beings with full consciousness and intelligence, but trapped in bodies that resemble giant frogs, unable to walk upright, regarded with even more disdain than their first-generation kin. They know what they are, they know how they are perceived, and they continue existing anyway, which is perhaps the most quietly heroic thing any being in the lands between does. The ancient dragons are another civilization of sorts, or at least a people with their own culture and history. In the age before the Erdtree, dragons dominated the lands between. They were not simply powerful animals, they were a civilization with their own form of worship, their own concept of divine power, centered on the ancient dragon Placidusax, who was the lord of a world that predated the current one. Placidusax had two heads, and both faces carry an expression of profound loss, because one of those heads represents a dragon who simply vanished, a god who abandoned the world, and Placidusax has waited in Fair Mazula, suspended in eternal storm for that absent god to return for longer than the current world has existed. Fair Mazula itself is extraordinary. It is a collection of ruins floating in the sky, suspended in a perpetual tempest outside of time itself. The beastmen and the dragons who inhabit it are not dying. They are not aging. They exist in a state of temporal suspension, preserved in a moment before whatever catastrophe scattered Farum Azula's stones across the storm. The fact that you can fight Dragonlord Placidu's axe there, accessing him through a hidden ritual of lying down in a specific location, surrounded by the bones of ancient beasts, feels less like a boss fight and more like a visitation. You're reaching back through time to disturb something that has been waiting, patiently and without hope, for an immeasurable span. Before we go any further, let us pause and think about you. The character you play, the Tarnished. The Tarnished are not heroes in any conventional sense. They are exiles. People who once had the grace of the Erdtree, that golden light that signifies divine favour, and then lost it. They were cast out of the lands between, and sent to roam the world beyond its borders, displaced and diminished, stripped of the Golden Order's protection and blessing. Why were the Tarnished stripped of grace? The game is deliberately vague, but the implication is that the Tarnished lost grace collectively, as a people, during or after the Shattering. The chaos of the Demigods' war, the instability of a world without a complete Elden Ring, caused the Golden Order to withdraw its favour from those it considered less essential. The Tarnished were the expendable ones, the ones the system could afford to lose, and then grace returns to them, specifically to them, long after their exile, long after they have been wandering outside the lands between. A golden thread appears in their vision, pointing them back toward the Erdtree, and they rise from wherever they fell and begin the journey back. Here is the fact that reframes the entire game if you sit with it. The Tarnished were not chosen because they are special. They were chosen because they are dispensable. The Greater Will, having lost its god and its Elden Ring, needs someone to fix the situation. It cannot use anyone currently inside the lands between because all of them are compromised. All of them have allegiances and histories and claims to power that complicate things. It needs clean instruments, blank slates with enough power to do the necessary work but without the autonomy to refuse it. The Tarnished are perfect for this because they are already dead, or close enough to dead that the distinction barely matters. They have been wandering in exile for decades or centuries. They have no stake in the current order. They have nothing to lose and no alternative future to protect. They are exactly the kind of desperate, purpose-starved being that a cosmic power can most easily direct. This is not a flattering framing, but it is the honest one, and Elden Ring, to its credit, lets you choose whether to accept this role or reject it. Several of the endings explicitly involve refusing to simply restore the Greater Will's preferred order, choosing instead to inaugurate something new or to serve a different master entirely. Melina is the character most associated with guiding the Tarnished through the early game. She appears at sites of grace, offers you the ability to level up in exchange for your runes, and claims to have no mother and no father, only a purpose she cannot remember, and a destination she cannot name. She's one of the game's most discussed mysteries. Here is what we can piece together about her. Melina appears to be a creation of Marika's, possibly a daughter in some metaphysical sense, possibly a fragment of Marika's own soul given independent form. Her connection to the Erdtree is intimate and complicated. She is willing to sacrifice herself to light the Erdtree on fire, an act that is necessary for one of the game's paths, but that costs her everything. And if you pursue the Frenzied Flame ending, she returns after you claim that power to announce that she will hunt you down, that she will be your enemy, that she will find a way to kill you. And there is something in the way she says it, quiet and certain and grieving, that suggests this is not a threat so much as a promise made to herself, a way of giving purpose to a being who has lost everything she was meant to do. Ranni's questline is widely considered one of the greatest questlines in any game, and it is filled with extraordinary facts. Her connection to the Snow Witch questline, the way she manipulates events across the entire game from her position in a doll's body, the fact that her final request to you after you complete her quest and potentially claim her ending is to simply take her hand, not to fight anything, not to solve any problem, simply to be present with her as she steps into the unknown. After everything, after all the cosmic scheming and the ancient resentments and the impossible tasks, what she wants in the end is company. The two fingers are the emissaries of the greater will in the lands between, physical representatives of the cosmic entity manifesting in the world as giant severed fingers that communicate in cryptic gestures. They are grotesque and fascinating in equal measure. The finger readers who interpret their gestures, old women who spend their lives decoding the body language of divine appendages, represent one of the stranger religious professions in any game. But here is the extraordinary fact about the two fingers. They are not infallible. They can be wrong. Enya, the finger reader you meet in the Round Table Hold, gradually reveals over the course of the game that the two fingers she serves have lost their guidance. They are confused, uncertain, giving contradictory signals. The greater will's emissaries in the lands between are operating without clear instructions, improvising in a situation their master did not anticipate. The god behind the Golden Order did not fully account for Marika's rebellion, and its representatives in the world are paying the price in confusion and uncertainty. The three fingers, by contrast, are the emissaries of the frenzied flame. They hide beneath the capital, accessible only through a labyrinthine underworld that tests the player's determination to find it. Their gifts are irrevocable. Touch the three fingers with nothing between your skin and theirs, not even clothing, not even armor, and they will brand you with a mark of the frenzied flame forever. There's only one way to undo this in the game, and it requires completing an entire quest line and obtaining a specific item before the game's final moments. The three fingers do not offer you a choice the way the two fingers do. They simply give you what you reached for. High in the mountains of Lucaria, built around a massive crater formed by a fallen meteor, stands the Academy of Raya Lucaria. This is the premier institution of sorcery in the lands between, and its history, its culture, its specific school of magic, and its relationship with the Golden Order form one of the richest veins of lore in the entire game. Sorcery and incantations are the two main schools of magic in Elden Ring, and their philosophical difference is significant. Incantations draw their power from faith, from a relationship with divine or natural forces, from the willingness to submit to something greater than the individual self. They are, in their structure, an act of devotion. Sorceries, by contrast, draw their power from intelligence, from understanding, from the scholar's mastery of glintstone, the crystallized essence of the stars themselves. This is worth dwelling on. Glintstone is stardust, the fundamental substance of sorcery in the lands between is material that has fallen from the stars, that carries within it something of the cosmos beyond the world. The sorcerers of Raya Lucaria do not worship the stars, they study them. They harvest their material essence and learn to channel it through trained intelligence rather than faithful submission. There is an inherent arrogance in sorcery, a belief that the cosmos can be understood and manipulated rather than simply obeyed, and this puts the Academy in a complicated relationship with the Golden Order throughout history. Rennala, before she was abandoned by Radahn, was the Queen of the Moon and the head of the Academy. Her school of sorcery centred on lunar magic, on the power of the full moon as a focusing lens for glintstone energies. The Moon Coven that she led practiced a form of magic that was simultaneously more organic and more mysterious than standard glintstone sorcery, drawing on the moon's tidal relationship with the world rather than simply on intellectual mastery of stellar material. Sellen is one of the most fascinating NPC questlines in the game. She's a master sorceress, exiled from the Academy for conducting forbidden research, who asks you to gather the primal glintstone of ancient sorcerers. The truth about Sellen, which emerges across a long and twisting questline, involves her true identity and her relationship to the history of Raya Lucaria in ways that reframe everything she's told you. She is not simply a talented exile. She's a student of the primeval current, a school of sorcery that seeks to return to the oldest and most fundamental expression of glintstone magic before the Academy systematized and restricted it. There is a recurring tension in Elden Ring between institutions that codify and restrict power and individuals who seek to practice power in its raw, unrestricted form. The Academy restricts sorcery, the Golden Order restricts faith, the Round Table Hold restricts access to the Elden Ring. Every major institution in the game is defined partly by what it forbids, and every major questline involves someone who's been exiled or excluded for transgressing those restrictions. The full moon sorceries that you can learn in Rennala's tradition are among the most beautiful spells in the game visually. Watching a massive sphere of silver light drift toward an enemy, or summoning a flowing trail of moonlight with a sword stroke, has an elegance that distinguishes it from more aggressive forms of magic. But the most powerful sorceries in the game's canon are the primeval stars, ancient celestial bodies whose spells evoke not the cool beauty of the moon, but the raw, ancient violence of stellar bodies impacting the earth. The Meteorite of Astel is perhaps the single most dramatic spell in the game. Astel, natural born of the void, is a creature that arrived on the world inside a meteor, an alien entity from outside the cosmos whose very existence challenges the categories the Golden Order has established. Two versions of Astel appear in the game, suggesting either that multiple such creatures arrived, or that Astel has some means of reproduction or replication that defies ordinary biology. Their bodies resemble crustaceans assembled from stars, their faces vast and insectoid, their behaviour driven by an alien logic that reads as madness from any human perspective. The fact that a spell can summon the meteor that carried such a creature speaks to the depth of primeval sorcery. The sorcerers who developed it were not merely using star material, they were channeling the actual cosmic events that delivered alien life to the world. They were reproducing at small scale the violence of a universe in motion. Now let us slow down a little further and drift through some of the hidden details that most players miss, the small facts and quiet secrets that the game buries in the corners of its world for those patient enough to find them. The Erdtree's roots run beneath the entire lands between. This is not a metaphor. If you explore the underground areas of the game, the deep-root depths and the various catacombs and cave systems, you will eventually encounter the actual physical roots of the Erdtree extending deep beneath the earth. And in the deepest part of these roots you will find Godwyn, his body, fused with the roots, transformed into the Prince of Death, the monstrous growth of flesh and wood that the Erdtree has incorporated into itself rather than expelling. There is something genuinely horrifying about this. The Erdtree, symbol of life and divine order, has not rejected Godwyn's corrupted body. It has absorbed it. incorporated the Prince of Death into its root system. What does this mean for everything that grows from the Erdtree? For the golden light that streams from its branches? For the grace that flows through the world and guides the faithful? If the Erdtree's roots are intertwined with a being of death and corruption, what is the true nature of the light it produces? The game never explicitly answers this, but it trusts you to ask the question. The Elden Star's incantation, one of the rarest and most powerful spells in the game, requires an item called the Elden Star's Gospel, which can be found hidden in a location most players never discover. When cast, it summons a stream of golden stars that rain down on enemies in sequence, each one impacting with delayed grace. But the description of the spell describes it as the most ancient incantation of the Erdtree, one that precedes all formal religious practice. It is, in essence, the Erdtree calling to those it has chosen. This spell is a representation of grace itself, of the moment when the Golden Order reaches out to someone and says, "You are mine." Using it as a weapon is an act of profound irony that the game does not comment on. The Elden Ring's location within the Erdtree is not where most players assume it is. It is not at the peak of the tree, not at any external point. It is within the capital itself, in a specific sacred location called the Elden Throne, accessible only after fighting through the entire royal capital of Leyndell. And when you finally reach it, after Marika's punishment has been made apparent, you realize that the Elden Throne is less a seat of power and more a site of execution. Marika was crucified here, bound to the ring she shattered, forced to maintain contact with the thing she tried to destroy. The Golden Order's response to her rebellion was not to remove her from power, but to make her power into her prison. There are messages left throughout the lands between by the Two Fingers guidance, encoded in the physical environment rather than in written text. The layout of certain areas, the positioning of certain enemies, the placement of certain items, all of these are said by some lore scholars to encode information about the history of the lands between that cannot be found anywhere else. Whether this is the developer's intentional design or the natural result of an extraordinarily dense mythology being expressed through environmental storytelling is a question worth sitting with. Dialos is one of the game's most tragic side characters, and most players either miss his questline entirely or complete it without fully understanding what they have witnessed. He is a nobleman who joins the Volcano Manor in search of his missing servant Lanya, only to discover that Lanya was killed by other members of the manor. His response to this discovery, his grief, and his subsequent choices lead him eventually to a ruined village where he tries and fails to protect a group of Albinaurics from attack. He dies trying to be worthy of something, trying to find a meaning for his grief by giving his life in service of people who had no reason to trust him. His questline ends with him dead on the ground of a ruined village, surrounded by the Albinaurics he could not save, having accomplished almost nothing in practical terms. And the game presents this not as a failure, but as something quietly, painfully human. He tried. He was insufficient. He died anyway, and the world moved on. The invisible paths in the consecrated snowfield, the final, major outdoor region of the game, are one of the most extraordinary pieces of game design in Elden Ring. These are paths across empty snow that are not visible at all, without either following footprints or discovering them through exploration. They lead to hidden areas including the secret entrance to the Haligtree, Miquella's tree, the one he grew himself in an attempt to create a place outside the Golden Order's influence, where the cursed and the cast out could find sanctuary. The Erdtree is heartbreaking in its current state. Miquella poured everything he had into this project, his divine power, his blood, his very essence. And then he was stolen by Mog, leaving the Erdtree without its creator, without its animating purpose. The tree grew and its communities formed, and the people who had found hope in Miquella's promise continued to live there. But without Miquella, the Erdtree began to rot. Not from scarlet rot, but from simple abandonment. A garden without its gardener, slowly returning to wilderness. Malenia came to the Erdtree to protect it in her brother's absence. She is its guardian, the final boss of this optional region, and she is described in loading screens and in the words of NPCs as the mightiest of all the demigods. Her battle is considered by many players to be the hardest fight in the game, and its difficulty is not accidental. She has never been beaten in all her history. Every fight she has fought, she has won. Even her loss to Radahn in Caelid, if it can be called a loss, ended with her unleashing the scarlet bloom that destroyed the entire region. She won by surviving. The specific detail that she has never known defeat, combined with the fact that she heals from every hit she lands on the player, even through blocked attacks, creates a boss that is philosophically as well as mechanically daunting. You're not fighting someone who can be worn down by attrition. You're fighting someone who gets stronger the longer the fight goes on. To defeat Malenia, you have to find a way to end the fight before she reaches her full, terrible potential. Let us talk about the Jar people, because no discussion of Elden Ring's hidden details is complete without them. The living jars, round ceramic vessels with legs and arms that walk around and engage in combat, seem at first like one of From Software's more purely whimsical design choices, but their lore, as revealed through item descriptions and NPC dialogue, is extraordinarily strange. The jars contain the remains of warriors who chose to be interred within them, their bodies packed inside the ceramic alongside weapons and armour, their spirits animating the vessel. They are not wearing jars. They are jars. The warrior inside has merged with the container, given up individual form in exchange for the protection and community of the jar culture. Iron Fist. Alexander, the most prominent jar character, is a warrior of profound enthusiasm and gentle spirit. He has a dream of becoming a warrior jar of great renown, of filling himself with the remains of the strongest fighters he can defeat so that their strength combines within him. His quest line takes him across the entire map in pursuit of this dream, and it ends in a final battle in the volcano region, where he asks you to fight him at full strength so that he can test himself, and, if he falls, have your remains to add to his collection. The fact that Alexander can be filled with the viscera of enemies is made explicit in the game's mechanics. You can refill him. You are, quite literally, feeding him the remains of his enemies, and he is grateful, enthusiastically and without reservation. Alexander is one of the most joyful characters in a game full of tragedy, and his joy makes the ending of his questline genuinely moving. There are characters in Elden Ring who exist at the very edges of the story, whose names appear only in item descriptions, whose faces you never see, whose influence on the world you walk through is enormous and almost entirely invisible. These are the people the history books of the lands between would not have written about, because history is written by those who win, and these people did not win anything. They simply endured, and in enduring, they shaped everything. Let us begin with Hugh, the blacksmith of the Round Table Hold. He is chained to his forge, not metaphorically, literally chained, iron manacles around his wrists, bound to the anvil where he works. He cannot leave. He has never left. He will never leave unless someone frees him, and no one has ever freed him. He forges weapons for the Tarnished who pass through, and he speaks with a resigned warmth that has long since processed whatever rage he might once have felt about his situation. Why is he chained? He does not fully know. He was brought to the Round Table hold and bound there in service of whatever purpose the hold was meant to serve. He has made peace with this, the way people make peace with things they cannot change. But he has one request, one purpose that gives his captivity meaning. He wants to forge a weapon worthy of a god. He believes it is possible. He has never managed it. Every Tarnished who passes through, he studies their weapons and wonders if this is the one, if these materials and this design are finally the path to what he has spent his whole captivity trying to achieve. Whether he achieves it depends on whether you bring him the right materials, whether the game's mechanics align with his dream. It is, in miniature, a perfect image of the entire game. An artisan bound to a purpose he did not choose, trying to find meaning in the service of others, hoping that the next person through the door will be the one who finally lets him do what he was put here to do. Millicent is one of the most extended and emotionally complex questlines in the entire game, and she is also one of the most heartbreaking. She's a young woman infected with scarlet rot, discovered near death, who is given a golden needle by Gowry, an old man in Caelid, that partially suppresses her infection. She begins to develop prosthetic arms to replace the ones the rot has taken from her. She begins, cautiously and then with increasing confidence, to build a life. The extraordinary fact about Millicent, which the game reveals only at the very end of her questline, is that she is one of Malenia's children. Not in the biological sense, but in the sense that Malenia's scarlet rot, spreading through Caelid, infected the earth, and from that infected earth grew Millicent and her sisters, budded from the rot like flowers from poisoned soil. She is, in the deepest sense, a daughter of the divine, born not from love, but from catastrophe, carrying in her veins the same power that devastated an entire region. And she does not know this. For most of her questline, she does not know her own origin. She simply knows that she is infected with something she cannot remove, and that she wants to live anyway. She wants to travel. She wants to see things. She wants to have the ordinary experiences that the rot in her blood has made complicated and dangerous. She is doing the most human thing possible in a world full of divine politics and cosmic horror. She is trying to have a life. Her ending depends on your choices. You can help her reach a final confrontation with the sisters who wish to absorb her rot back into themselves. You can betray her to those sisters. The game does not judge you for either choice in any heavy-handed way. It simply shows you the consequences. And the consequence of helping her, of watching her survive and look at the world with something approaching peace, is quietly one of the most satisfying moments in the entire game. Patches is a recurring character across multiple From Software games, always a tricky, self-interested rogue who flatters you and then attempts to rob or kill you, and then is deeply apologetic when you survive. In Elden Ring, he follows this tradition faithfully, but he also has moments of genuine warmth that make his persistent treachery all the more interesting. He sets up a shop after his initial deception. He sells you things at reasonable prices. He occasionally expresses something that sounds like actual concern for the people he encounters. The fact that Patches appears across so many different games, in different worlds with different histories playing essentially the same role, has led fans to theorize that he is in some sense a constant, a figure who exists outside the narrative frameworks of the individual games. From Software has never confirmed or denied this. They simply keep putting him in, and he keeps being exactly himself. There is something almost philosophical about a character who persists across catastrophes by being reliably, cheerfully, and not entirely maliciously himself. Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, is the ostensible leader of the Tarnished community at the Round Table Hold, and he is one of the most interesting examples of intellectual cowardice in any game. He is brilliant. He knows more about the lands between and the Elden Ring and the history of the Golden Order than almost anyone else alive. He has spent decades gathering information, cataloguing secrets, building a database of knowledge that would make the scholars of Raya Lucaria envious, and he uses all of this knowledge to do nothing. He is paralysed by it. He knows too much to act with the confidence that action requires. He knows that every path to the Elden Ring leads through horror and loss. He knows that every ending has costs. He knows that the Golden Order is flawed, and that restoring it solves nothing fundamental. And so he sits at the Round Table Hold and gathers more information and waits for clarity that never comes. By the time you reach him near the end of the game, he has concluded that the quest should be abandoned entirely, that no one should become Elden Lord, that the Elden Ring should be left shattered. He fights you to enforce this conclusion, wielding all his accumulated knowledge as a weapon, and there is something genuinely sad about fighting him. He's not wrong about the costs, he's simply wrong about the conclusion. Knowledge without the courage to act on it is just an elaborate way of giving up. The Tarnished who failed, the Tarnished who came before you, are present throughout the game as messages and ghosts and the various hostile Tarnished NPCs you encounter. But there is a specific group worth mentioning. The Volcano Manor assassination targets, the various people that Tanith asks you to hunt and kill as part of your membership in Ricard's court, are all Tarnished who are pursuing their own paths to the Elden Ring, and who, for various reasons, Ricard's people consider threats or obstacles. What is remarkable about these targets is the specificity of their descriptions. They are not abstract enemies. Each one is a person with a history, a motivation, a specific approach to the quest that distinguishes them from every other Tarnished pursuing the same goal. The invasion letters that introduce them read like bunch of graphical sketches, brief but detailed enough to make each target feel real. You're not hunting archetypes, you're hunting individuals, and when you kill them, as Volcano Manor requires, you receive their items. The possessions they carried with them on their quest, the things they thought important enough to bring from wherever they started. In those items sometimes are echoes of who they were and what they wanted. It is a very small form of memorial, but it is present. Let us talk about the Lands Between's geography in more detail, because the physical shape of the world encodes its history in ways that reward careful attention. The Altus Plateau, the elevated region that contains Lendel and the capital's surrounding lands, is elevated precisely because it is the oldest part of the Lands Between, in terms of Golden Order habitation. The higher ground was developed first, and the lower lands were brought into the Order's influence later. This is why Liurnia, the lake region, has the feel of a contested borderland. It was, historically, where the Golden Order's expansion met the Academy's independence. The scars of that historical tension are present in the landscape. The Siofra River, the underground river system that runs beneath much of the Lands Between and connects the Eternal Cities to the surface world, is named for a concept from Irish mythology. The Siofra are fairy folk who steal children and replace them with changelings. In the context of the game, the name is darkly appropriate. The underground river connects a world of ancient civilization to the surface, and the exchange between them has been marked by loss and replacement throughout history. The Rot Lake at the bottom of the world, the Lake of Rot, sits at the base of a massive underground cavern beneath Noxtella. Its placement is significant. The Eternal City was cast into the earth by the Greater Will for the hubris of trying to create their own Elden Ring. And directly beneath that city, filling the bedrock below it, is the physical presence of the god of Scarlet Rot. The Nox built their civilization directly above a god of dissolution. Whether they knew this or not is unclear. Whether it contributed to their banishment is a question the game does not answer. The divine towers that stand at specific points around the map are structures built to communicate with the two fingers and through them with the greater will. Each tower is connected to a specific region and a specific great rune. Reaching the top of each tower and activating a great rune involves a traversal that is more ritualistic than combat-focused, a long climb through a structure that feels more like a temple than a dungeon. The view from the top of each tower, looking out over the lands between from a position of genuine height, is among the most beautiful things in the game. The fact that these towers still function, still transmit to the two fingers, still activate the runes you bring them, despite the fact that the entire Golden Order apparatus they were built to support has been shattered, says something about the durability of systems. The infrastructure outlasts the civilization. The channels remain open even when no one is sending messages through them. The towers wait, as everything in this game waits, for someone to use them again. The minor Erdtrees that dot the landscape, smaller versions of the great golden tree that provide light, and sites of grace in their local areas have all been corrupted or changed by the time you encounter most of them. The flame of frenzy burns in some of them, others have been overtaken by rot. Still others seem simply abandoned, their grace departed, their roots dry and dead. Each corrupted minor Erdtree represents a point where the Golden Order's influence has failed in that specific location, a hole in the golden fabric of the world where something else has gotten in, and in those holes, in those failures of the Golden Order's comprehensive control, something interesting happens. Communities form. People find ways to live that do not depend on the Erdtree's blessing. They develop their own relationships with the land, their own sources of warmth and meaning that are not golden. They're not thriving in any comfortable sense, but they are surviving, and surviving on their own terms, which is in some ways more dignified than surviving on the Golden Order's charity. The nomadic merchants who wander the lands between with their caravans and their strange wares are some of the most mysterious characters in the game. They sell unusual items. They know things about the history of the lands between that most settled people do not. And when you speak to them, they often reference a collective memory, a shared tradition of people who live outside fixed settlements and fixed allegiances. Their songs, which play when you're near their camps, are among the most haunting pieces of music in the game. Simple, modal, redolent of loss and long roads, and the specific peace that comes from having given up on having a home. The merchants do not fight for anyone. They do not serve any order, golden or otherwise. They move through the world like water through rock, finding the paths that are available, trading what they have for what they need, and asking nothing more of the universe than to be left alone to keep moving. Their origin, hinted at in certain item descriptions, is connected to an ancient curse. They are descended from a group who are sealed away, imprisoned, their communication restricted by a golden order that feared what they knew and could share. They trade as a form of remembrance, keeping alive the idea of exchange and connection in a world that keeps trying to restrict both. Elden Ring's score is one of the most extraordinary in gaming history, and the facts behind it are worth dwelling on even in a video about lore rather than production. The boss themes are composed to reflect the nature of each enemy. Morgott's theme is tense and erratic, full of sudden pauses and rushing crescendos that mirror his unpredictable fighting style. Godrick's theme begins with a certain pomposity, before dissolving into something more desperate and frantic as the fight progresses, mirroring his own descent from aristocratic pretension into panicked violence. Malenia's theme is the one most discussed. It begins slowly, almost delicately, a piece of music that could almost be a lullaby before it opens into something vast and terrible. The theme incorporates elements of decay and blossoming simultaneously, of something beautiful and something poisonous occupying the same musical space. There is a moment in the theme where the full orchestra comes in and the sound becomes almost overwhelming, and that moment corresponds to the point in the fight where Malenia has fully committed, where her rot is blooming and her movements are at their most lethal and her grace is at its most terrible. Radahn's theme is one of the most beloved in the game. It is enormous and celebratory, full of brass and percussion that suggests not darkness and fear but grandeur and even joy. It is the theme of a festival, because the fight against Radahn is literally framed as a festival. The Festival of Radahn, an event held by his remaining soldiers to give their lord an honourable battle. The music honours what Radahn was before the rot took his mind. It plays for the warrior, not the beast. Placidusax's theme is the most ancient-sounding music in the game, appropriately for the lord of a world that predates the current one. It incorporates sounds that resemble thunder and stormwind, echoing the perpetual tempest of Fair Mazula, and underneath them, a melody so old-sounding it seems to have been there before the world began. The ambient music of the lands between, the pieces that play as you explore open areas, shift depending on location and time of day and story progress. The music of Limgrave, the starting region, is melancholy but not hopeless. It is the music of a place that remembers better days without entirely despairing of the future. The music of Caelid, the rot-scarred eastern region, is discordant and wrong in ways that physical description cannot fully capture. It sounds like a place where the normal rules have stopped applying, where the correct frequencies of the world have been disrupted by something fundamental. The mountain tops of the giants, that vast frozen plateau where Marika's war against the giants was decided, has music that is perhaps the most desolate in the game. Wind and distance and the sound of something that was once much larger and much louder, now reduced to silence. The giants are gone. Their civilization is rubble. The fire they worshipped still burns in its forge, tended by a prisoner, and the wind moves through ruins that have been cold for longer than most civilizations have existed. The Haligtree's music, when you finally reach it after navigating the invisible paths of the snowfield, shifts to something unexpected. There is a sweetness in it, a fragile quality, like music from a place that was meant to be a garden, and has not entirely forgotten what that felt like, even though the gardener is gone and the flowers are beginning to turn. It is the sound of an intention that has outlasted the person who had it. These musical facts matter for the same reason all the other facts we have discussed tonight matter. They are evidence of the extraordinary care and attention that went into creating this world. Every detail was considered, every choice was intentional. The world of Elden Ring did not grow up haphazardly. It was built, piece by piece, with the kind of obsessive craft that produces something you can return to dozens of times and still find things you missed. That density of meaning is why it makes such good company for the long hours of the night. There is always more. Always another layer. Always another connection you have not yet made between one item description and another, between one character's tragedy and another's, between the shape of the world and the history that shaped it. It is a world that rewards patience. And patience, in the quiet hours before sleep, is something you have in abundance. Before we reach our final stretch, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. Whether you're still wide awake, turning every fact over in your mind, finding new connections and new meanings, or whether you're drifting now, your thoughts growing softer and slower, carried on the tide of all these stories toward the shore of sleep. I am grateful for your company tonight. If this journey through the lands between has meant something to you, I would love it if you would subscribe to Nightfall Lore and leave a comment about which part of Elden Ring's lore surprised you most. Your support makes these long, slow journeys possible, and your comments often become the seeds of future videos. Now, the endings. Elden Ring has 6 endings, and each one represents a distinct philosophical position on what should be done with a broken world and a shattered god. Understanding all 6, really understanding them, reveals that the game is not about choosing between good and evil. It is about choosing between different values, different visions of what existence should look like. The Age of Fracture is the most straightforward ending. You gather the great runes, you mend the Elden Ring with your own power, and you are crowned Elden Lord under Marika's guidance. The Golden Order is restored, more or less as it was. This ending is, in the game's own terms, the expected one. The one the Two Fingers and the Golden Order apparatus wanted, and it is in some ways the most hollow, because it changes nothing fundamental about the system that produced the Shattering in the first place. The same order, slightly repaired, placed back in power. Whether that is stability or stagnation depends on your perspective. The Age of Duskborn is achieved by completing Fia's questline, the Deathbed Companion, a woman who embraces the dead and holds their warmth, and who is carrying within her the great rune of death restored by Godwyn's cursed remains. Her vision of a new order is one where true death is returned to the world, where the Erdtree's cycle of collecting and recycling souls is broken, where the dead can truly rest rather than being processed back into service of the divine machine. This is a quiet, gentle, melancholy ending. The world becomes darker, less golden, but perhaps more honest. People can die, and in dying find rest. Fia herself is one of the most controversial NPCs in the game among players, because her action of embracing the player character and the various male NPCs she encounters throughout the game is presented ambiguously. Some players find her manipulative, using the comfort of physical warmth to gather the power she needs. Others see her as genuinely compassionate, offering the one thing she has to give to people who are desperate and alone. The game seems to suggest both readings are correct simultaneously. She does need something from those she embraces. She also genuinely cares about them. These things are not mutually exclusive. The Age of Order is perhaps the most philosophically interesting of the restorative endings. It is achieved by completing the questline of Brother Corhun and Goldmask, a fanatical cleric and a silent mask-wearing sage. Goldmask never speaks. He communicates only through gesture and positioning, and Corhun spends the entire game desperately trying to interpret what the silent sage means. The conclusion they reach together, through a collaboration of devoted interpretation, is that the Golden Order as it exists is flawed. That a true Golden Order, one purged of its contradictions and its accommodations, would be superior. Their ending does not simply restore the old order, it attempts to perfect it. The tragedy of this ending is that we cannot know if they are right. The Age of Order they inaugurate is not shown. We see only the beginning of it, the moment of decision. Whether the perfected Golden Order is better than the fractured one is a question that hangs in the air unanswered. The Age of the Stars, Ranni's ending, we've already discussed. But let us sit with it one more time. Ranni has spent an incalculable amount of time working toward a specific vision of freedom, not freedom for herself alone, though that is part of it. Freedom from the greater will's oversight of the world, an existence in which the cosmos operates according to its own principles rather than according to the preferences of a cosmic entity with an agenda. When she steps into the night sky, when she sets off into the universe beyond the world, there is something in her voice that sounds like relief, like a person who has been holding their breath for centuries finally exhaling. Whether the age she inaugurates is good for the people of the lands between is genuinely unclear. Cold, distant stellar forces are not inherently kinder than a warm but manipulative divine order. But they are honest in their indifference in a way that the greater will's supposed benevolence never was. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending is the most destructive. If you have claimed the Frenzied Flame and completed the game without removing its mark, your character becomes the Lord of Chaos and burns everything. The Erdtree, the Golden Order, the lands between. Everything is consumed by the yellow flame, dissolved into undifferentiated unity. It is, as endings go, a kind of mercy if you believe the Frenzied Flame's philosophy that all separation is suffering, and it is a catastrophe if you do not. What makes this ending remarkable is Melina's response. She returns in a brief post-credits scene, her expression resolved and terrible, to announce that she will seek the power to end you. She has given everything she had to the purpose of reaching the Erdtree, and you have destroyed it. Her grief has transformed into something cold and precise. She is no longer your guide, she is your consequence. The Blessing of Despair is the final ending, achieved through Dung-Eater's questline, a deeply repulsive character who seeks to curse all of humanity with the Omen's mark, to spread the physical stigma of the Omen across every living person in the lands between. His motivation, such as it can be called that, is a kind of nihilistic resentment, a desire to make everyone suffer the way Omens suffer rather than to eliminate that suffering. It is the least sympathetic of all the endings, and the game does not try to make it sympathetic. It is simply available, a testament to the game's commitment to presenting the full range of possible choices without editorializing. As we enter our final stretch together, let me share some of the smallest and strangest details in Elden Ring. The kind of facts that seem trivial until you think about them for a moment, and then suddenly seem profoundly important. Every sight of grace in the game emits a golden light that points in a general direction. Early in the game, this light points roughly towards Stormveil Castle. Later, it points toward Lendal. It is always pointing toward your next goal, a subtle and a non-intrusive navigation aid that most players use without ever consciously registering as a feature. But lore-wise, what this represents is grace literally guiding the Tarnished. The divine light that flows through the world is directing your path in real time. You are being steered, and if you are aware of this, the question naturally arises, steered by whom, and toward what end? The Pureblood Knight's Medal, used to immediately teleport to Mog's realm without completing the journey there normally, is an item that several NPCs react to with strong emotion. Some are horrified, some are fascinated. The fact that Mog created a formal mechanism for inviting allies into his blood dynasty, complete with official medals, speaks to the degree to which he genuinely believed in what he was building. He was not simply hoarding power, he was building a court, a civilization, an alternative future. The medal is a formal invitation to participate in that future, and the horror it provokes in others is a measure of how seriously they take the threat it represents. The stone-sword keys that unlock imp statue barriers throughout the game are made from the stone of old ruins. They are literally fragments of old buildings reshaped into keys. There are buildings throughout the lands between whose stone was quarried to create these keys, meaning that somewhere in the world there are ruins that are missing pieces of themselves because those pieces were used to create locks and keys for other places. The entire system of imp statue barriers is a form of ancient architecture using its own material to regulate access to its secrets. The Mimic tier, which we mentioned earlier as a silver tier summon, has a specific behaviour that most players notice but few consider carefully. It copies your character's current loadout at the moment you summon it. If you summon it while unequipped, it will fight unarmed and unarmoured. This seems like a gameplay quirk, but consider the lore of what a Mimic tier is. It is a creature of perfect imitation, a blob of living silver that has learned to become what it sees. Summoning it while naked is essentially showing it your most vulnerable, most fundamental self, and it responds by fighting as that self, bare and unprotected but committed. There are birds in Elden Ring that drop enormous amounts of runes when killed, and several of these birds are positioned at the edges of cliffs in ways that make fighting them extremely dangerous. Players have developed strategies for killing these birds efficiently, often involving projectiles that send the birds tumbling off cliffs. But consider what these birds are from a lore perspective. They are not simply large animals. They're ancient creatures associated with specific regions of the lands between, their plumage and behaviour adapted to environments that in some cases no longer exist. The cliff-edge birds of the mountain tops of the giants, for example, exist in a region whose native civilization was destroyed by Marika's war. The birds predate the current age. They have been living on those mountains since before the Golden Order existed. The catacomb dungeons that repeat throughout the game, with somewhat similar layouts, are, according to the lore, not simply copy-pasted environments. They're all connected to the same tradition of burial, the same funerary practice established in the age when the Erdtree's connection to death still functioned properly. When people died, and their souls were intended to return to the tree, their bodies were interred in these catacombs according to specific rites. The Erdtree burial watchdogs that guard them are not simply monsters placed there as challenges. They are the remains of creatures appointed specifically to ensure the proper conduct of the funerary process. They are still doing their jobs, millennia after the system they served stopped working, because no one told them to stop. The wandering nobles who shuffle around certain areas of the game, muttering and seemingly lost, are tarnished like you who've lost their purpose. They found grace but could not hold it, couldn't maintain the focus and the will that the journey requires. They are earlier arrivals who became, as the game terms it, hollowed in spirit if not in body. They are a reminder of what failure looks like in the lands between. Not dramatic defeat, simply slow dissolution. The gradual loss of purpose until all that remains is the empty motion of something that was once a person walking forward out of habit. The Round Table Hold, the hub area where you can interact with various NPCs and upgrade equipment, exists in a strange relationship with normal space. It is accessible from any site of grace, implying it does not occupy a fixed physical location, but rather a kind of liminal space that can be approached from anywhere. Melina tells you that it is kept from the flow of time, preserved in a kind of eternal present. The NPCs there do not age, do not move between locations on their own initiative mostly. They are fixed points in an unfixed world. The fact that this sanctuary can be invaded, as it is during a specific point late in the game, is profoundly disturbing in a way the game communicates entirely through atmosphere. If the Round Table hold can be violated, nothing is safe. The sanctuary is revealed as conditional, dependent on powers that can be withdrawn. And the invasion that eventually occurs is not random. It is a consequence of specific story events, of choices made and thresholds crossed. Safety, Elden Ring suggests, is always contingent. And now we arrive at the end of our long journey through the lands between. The sky outside your window, if you are still awake to see it, is perhaps beginning to lighten. Or perhaps you are already deep in dreams, and these words are simply the sound of a world you will return to in daylight, a world that will make more sense having spent these hours moving through its history. Elden Ring, at its deepest level, is a meditation on systems, on the institutions we build to manage the chaos of existence, and on what those institutions cost us, and on what happens when they fail. The Golden Order was, by any measure, an achievement. It stabilised a chaotic world. It promised continuity, direction, purpose. It gave people a framework within which to understand their lives. And it was built on exploitation, on the expendability of the weak, on the concealment of its own contradictions. The Shattering was terrible. The wars of the Demigods were catastrophic. The world you walk through in the game is the wreckage of something that should have been better. But the game is not simply mourning the loss of what was. It is asking whether what was is worth restoring. Whether the Golden Order, even perfected, even repaired, is the right framework for the world. Or whether the Shattering, as painful as it is, represents an opportunity to try something genuinely different. This is not a question with a simple answer, and Elden Ring does not offer one. It gives you 6 options and trusts you to decide what kind of world you want to build from the ruins. Some players choose the same ending every playthrough. Some choose differently each time, trying to understand each position from the inside. Some spend dozens of hours in New Game Plus cycles simply to hear each NPC's final words, to understand each character's perspective as completely as possible before making the choice. The game is also, in a quieter register, about the experience of being small in a world built by and for forces much larger than yourself. The Tarnished is not, in cosmic terms, important. They are an instrument, a tool selected for a specific job, and the game lets you choose what to do with that knowledge. You can use your position as an instrument to restore the system that instrumentalized you. You can refuse and build something else. You can reject the entire framework and burn it down. You can simply serve a different master. But beneath all the cosmic choices and the divine politics and the extraordinary world building, there is something more intimate in Elden Ring's story. There are characters who loved people and lost them. Ranni, holding her amber, singing to her absent husband. Radahn, fighting the stars in place for his mother's sake and his sister's resentment. Godwyn, the kindest of all of them, who deserved better than what he got. Morgott, defending a society that despises him because he does not know how to want anything different. Malenia, living inside a body that has been weaponized against her will, finding a grace in battle that she cannot find anywhere else. These are not allegories, they are people, as fully realized and as painfully recognizable as any people in any story. Their suffering is not abstract, it is specific and it is felt. And the world they inhabit, for all its golden grandeur and cosmic scope, is a world of loss as much as it is a world of wonder. That is what makes the lands between worth spending time in. Not the challenge, not the bosses, not even the extraordinary beauty of its environments, though that beauty is real and often breathtaking. It is the people who built the world, who broke it, who tried to fix it, who gave up and found something else to believe in, who held on long past the point where holding on made any sense, simply because they did not know how to let go. You have spent these hours with them, with Marika in her prison of gold, with Ranni in her borrowed body plotting freedom across centuries, with Godwyn sleeping his terrible sleep in the roots of a tree that will not let him go, with Alexander enthusiastically terrible at everything except joy, with Melina walking toward a sacrifice she has chosen with full awareness of the cost, with Fia holding the warmth of the dead so that something of them remains, with all of them. And now, as these words slow and soften, as the long hours of the night settle into their final stillness, let them rest. Let the lands between exist. Somewhere in the back of your mind, golden and broken and full of stories you have not yet found. Let the sights of grace glow in your memory, their light pointing always forward, towards something that might be redemption, and might be simply the next thing that needs to be faced. You are a Tarnished. You were chosen because you were expendable. You rose anyway. You walked into a world that was ending and you kept walking, and you found, in the middle of all that ruin, that the world still had things worth understanding, worth grieving for, worth perhaps trying to save. If this journey meant something to you, please subscribe to Nightfall Lore and leave a comment about your favourite character, your favourite ending, your favourite hidden detail in this extraordinary game. Your support makes these videos possible, and every comment, every like, every subscription is another reason to keep going deeper into the worlds that deserve this kind of attention. Until next time, may the Golden Order, whatever remains of it, treat you gently, and if it does not, may you find the strength to build something better in its place. Sleep well, good Tarnished. The lands between will be here when you wake, and there will always be more to discover.